Marcus Chun wiped grease from his weathered hands as he watched another cargo hauler dock at Kepler Station. The massive alien vessel, sleek and predatory like its Zephyrian owners, settled into the docking bay with the kind of precision that came from technology humans could barely comprehend. He'd been fixing alien ships for 15 years now, ever since the Galactic Consortium had graciously allowed Earth into their trading network as a junior partner. Junior partner. The phrase still left a bitter taste in his mouth. The docking bay stretched out before him, a cathedral of metal and alien architecture that dwarfed anything humans had built before first contact. Crystalline spires from the ethereal worlds caught and refracted the station's artificial sunlight, while biomechanical tendrils from hive ships writhed slowly in their maintenance cradles. Marcus had learned to read the subtle differences between the various alien technologies over the years, knowledge that kept him employed and his small human settlement fed. His workshop occupied a corner of the lower maintenance deck, a cramped space filled with salvage parts and jury-rigged equipment. The aliens tolerated human mechanics because they were cheap and surprisingly good at improvising solutions with limited resources. What they didn't realize was that every repair taught humans something new about galactic technology. Marcus. The voice belonged to Elena Vasquez, one of the few other humans who worked the docks. She approached with careful steps, her eyes scanning the area for any aliens who might overhear. There's going to be an auction today. Sector 7. Marcus looked up from a quantum drive housing he'd been examining. What kind of auction? Salvage. A draconian cruiser went down near the Helix Nebula last month. The consortium recovery teams have been bringing in cargo all week. Elena lowered her voice further. Word is they're selling off everything they can't identify or don't want to deal with. The Draconians were among the most feared species in the galaxy. Ancient, powerful, and utterly ruthless, they had held territory in the galactic core for millennia before humanity had even discovered fire. Their ships were works of art and terror combined, sleek vessels that could tear through most fleets without slowing down. The fact that one had been destroyed was noteworthy enough. The fact that its cargo was being auctioned off as salvage suggested something had gone very, very wrong. Might be worth a look, Marcus said carefully. Sometimes they don't recognize valuable components. It was true, though the real reason he wanted to attend had nothing to do with profit. 3 months ago, his wife Sarah had died in a mining accident on Titan. The consortium's investigation had been perfunctory at best, concluding the human safety protocols were adequate for the species' natural resilience. The compensation had been insultingly small. Since then, Marcus had been quietly collecting anything that might give him insight into the technologies that kept humanity in its subordinate position. The auction was held in one of the station's cargo bays, hastily converted for the purpose. A few hundred beings of various species milled about, examining lots of salvaged equipment. Most of the bidders were traders or corporate representatives, beings whose species had earned some measure of respect in the galactic hierarchy. Humans were few and far between. Marcus moved through the crowd, noting the various items up for bid. Most were clearly beyond his means or understanding, exotic technologies that pulsed with energies his scanners couldn't identify. But near the back of the bay, almost forgotten among the larger lots, he found something interesting. The auction listing simply read, Draconian Biopod, Unknown Function, Lot 847. It sat on a standard cargo platform, roughly the size of a small shuttle, but shaped like an enormous egg. The surface was dark metal that seemed to absorb light, covered in intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. A faint humming emanated from within, barely audible above the ambient noise of the auction. Marcus circled the pod slowly, his engineers taking in details. The metal was unlike anything he'd seen before, seamlessly formed without visible joints or welds. Whatever was inside was clearly alive, or at least active, given the subtle vibrations he could feel through the deck plating. Most importantly, none of the major buyers seemed interested. They classified it as some kind of stasis pod or storage container, not worth their time. The auctioneer, a thin ethereal whose crystalline body caught and scattered the bay's lighting, called for bids on Lot 847. The starting price was laughably low, barely enough to cover handling costs. Marcus raised his hand. 500 credits, he called out. A few beings turned to look at him with expressions that ranged from amusement to mild contempt. One of the Zephyrian traders made a dismissive clicking sound. Humans bidding on draconian artifacts was apparently considered presumptuous. 500 from the human, the auctioneer announced in the galaxy's trade language. Any other bids? Silence stretched across the bay. The major buyers had already moved on to the next lot, a collection of what appeared to be draconian weapon systems. Marcus held his breath. Sold to bidder 247, the auctioneer declared. Just like that, Marcus owned something that had belonged to one of the galaxy's apex predators. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. The consortium wanted the salvage cleared out quickly, and they weren't particularly concerned about who bought what as long as the credits transferred properly. Within an hour, Marcus had arranged for the pod to be transported to his workshop. It took up most of the available floor space, forcing him to rearrange his equipment around its bulk. Up close, the humming was more pronounced, and he could feel warmth radiating from the metal surface. His scanners were largely useless. The materials seemed to deflect most forms of electronic sensing. Elena arrived as he was trying to find some kind of access panel or control interface. "What exactly did you buy?" she asked, walking slowly around the pod. "I'm not entirely sure," Marcus admitted. The manifest called it a biopod. Could be a stasis chamber, could be a specimen container. The Draconians were known for biological engineering. Or it could be a weapon, Elena pointed out. The Draconians weren't exactly known for their peaceful nature. Marcus had considered that possibility. The Draconians had a well-deserved reputation for creating living weapons, organisms specifically designed for warfare. But something about the pod's design suggested a different purpose. The patterns etched into its surface weren't aggressive or intimidating. If anything, they had an almost protective quality. He spent the next 3 hours going over every inch of the pod's surface, looking for some kind of interface or control mechanism. The patterns shifted slightly when he touched them, responding to pressure or perhaps body heat, but nothing seemed to trigger any kind of response from whatever was inside. It was Elena who found the key. She had been running her hands over a section near what they had assumed was the pod's base when she pressed a particular combination of symbols. The humming suddenly intensified, and a section of the dark metal became transparent. Inside was a dragon. Not a dragon in the mythological sense, but something that would have been immediately recognizable to any human who had grown up with fairy tales. It was roughly the size of a large dog, with scales that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on the angle of view. Delicate wings were folded against its sides, and even in whatever form of stasis it was experiencing, its breathing was visible as a slow, steady rhythm. "Jesus," Elena whispered. "Is it real?" Marcus pressed his face closer to the transparent section. The creature was definitely alive, though clearly in some form of suspended animation. Its features were refined, almost elegant, with an intelligence visible even in its sleeping state. This wasn't some mindless beast or engineered weapon. This was a thinking being. The Draconians named themselves after Earth mythology, Marcus said slowly. But we always assumed it was coincidence, or maybe they got the information from our cultural databases after first contact. "You're saying this thing is actually a dragon? Like from human stories?" "I'm saying that the Draconians might have had contact with Earth a lot earlier than anyone thought." Marcus stood back from the pod, his mind racing through the implications. What if our dragon myths weren't myths at all? What if they were memories? The thought was staggering. Official galactic history placed human first contact at barely 3 decades ago, when Earth's primitive radio signals had been detected by a consortium survey ship. But what if humanity had encountered aliens before? What if the dragons of legend had been real, visiting Earth in humanity's distant past? Elena was examining the control interface more carefully. "There's writing here," she said, "but it's not Draconian script. It looks almost like what? Like a mix of human languages. Old ones." She traced the symbols with her finger. "This section looks like it might be Sanskrit. This part could be ancient Egyptian. And this..." She paused. "This looks like Chinese characters, but really old ones." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Elena was right, then the pod hadn't been designed by Draconians at all. Or at least, not by Draconians alone. The station's shift change chimed softly through the workshop's comm system. Marcus realized he'd been working for nearly 6 hours without a break. The dragon continued its slow, steady breathing, apparently unaffected by their discovery of its prison. "We need to be careful," Elena said quietly. If the consortium finds out we have something like this, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The Galactic Consortium had very specific policies about dangerous biological specimens. They would confiscate the pod, probably destroy its contents, and Marcus would be lucky to avoid charges of reckless endangerment. But as he looked at the sleeping dragon, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: purpose. This creature represented something important, something that could change humanity's understanding of its place in the galaxy. He couldn't let it be destroyed by bureaucratic paranoia. "Help me move it to the secure storage bay," he said. "We need to study this properly." The secure storage bay was technically Marcus's personal workspace, a small area he'd claimed and modified over the years. It was shielded from most forms of scanning and had independent power and life support systems. If they're going to figure out what they'd stumbled upon, they needed privacy. Moving the pod was surprisingly easy. Whatever the Draconians had built it from was lighter than it appeared, and the station's artificial gravity systems made the task manageable for 2 humans. They managed to get it relocated without attracting attention from the few aliens who worked the night shift. Once the pod was secured, Marcus began a more detailed examination. The control interface was becoming clearer as he studied it. Elena was right about the mixed linguistic origins, but there was also something else. The symbols seemed to respond to human touch differently than they would to alien contact. It's biometrically locked, he realized. The pod is designed to respond only to human genetic markers. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just evidence of ancient contact between humans and aliens. This was proof that humans had been specifically chosen for something important enough to preserve across thousands of years and countless light years of space. As if responding to his thoughts, the pod's humming shifted to a different frequency. The transparent section expanded, revealing more of the sleeping dragon. And for just a moment, its eyes opened. They were unmistakably intelligent, ancient beyond measure, and filled with something that might have been hope. Then they closed again, and the dragon returned to its slumber. But Marcus had seen enough to know that his life, and possibly humanity's future, had just changed forever. Outside the workshop, Kepler Station continued its endless cycle of trade and commerce. Alien ships came and went, carrying cargo and passengers across the vast reaches of space. The galactic civilization that had grudgingly accepted humanity as a junior member continued to function exactly as it always had. None of them realized that a widowed human mechanic had just purchased the key to everything. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his workshop, staring at the dragon pod, while running through everything he knew about galactic history, human mythology, and alien technology. Elena had gone back to her quarters after helping him move the pod, but not before making him promise to contact her before attempting to open it. The promise was starting to feel like a mistake. Every few hours, the dragon's eyes would open for a few seconds, always seeming to look directly at him through the transparent metal. There was definitely intelligence there, and something else. Recognition, maybe, as if the creature knew him, or at least knew what he was. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He was going to try to wake it up. The workshop's scanner array, designed for analyzing salvaged alien technology, revealed more details about the pod's construction when he directed them at specific sections. The metal wasn't just exotic. It was actively maintained by some kind of microscopic nanotechnology that constantly repaired and adjusted its structure. The life support systems were more sophisticated than anything humans had developed, maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions while somehow providing nutrition to its occupant. Most interesting was the power source. Instead of the exotic matter cores or quantum batteries used by most galactic civilizations, the pod drew its energy from something else entirely. It took Marcus several hours to realize what he was looking at. It's powered by quantum entanglement, he told Elena when she arrived for her shift. But not with any exotic particles or artificial constructs. It's entangled with something natural. What kind of natural phenomenon has enough energy to power this thing? Marcus pulled up his analysis on his workshop's display system. Stars. It's drawing power directly from stellar cores across the galaxy. The entanglement network is so sophisticated that distance doesn't matter. As long as there are stars burning somewhere in the galaxy, this thing has unlimited power. Elena stared at the readings. That's impossible. The consortium's best scientists haven't figured out large-scale quantum entanglement. Half the species in the galaxy would kill for technology like that. Which explains why it was hidden in a draconian ship, Marcus said, and why they went to such lengths to protect it. He had spent the morning researching everything he could find about the draconian cruiser that had been destroyed near the Helix Nebula. Official reports claimed it had been lost to a navigation error during a routine patrol, but Marcus's access to the station's maintenance networks had revealed some interesting inconsistencies. The ship hadn't been on patrol at all. It had been running dark, using stealth systems that officially didn't exist, when something had destroyed it with weapons that left energy signatures unlike anything in the consortium's databases. Someone or something had wanted this pod very badly, and they had been willing to destroy one of the galaxy's most advanced warships to get it. "We should report this to the authorities," Elena said, though her voice suggested she didn't really believe her own words. "And tell them what? That we discovered proof that humans had contact with aliens thousands of years before official first contact? That we're in possession of technology that could revolutionize galactic civilization?" Marcus shook his head. "They'd classify everything, confiscate the pod, and we'd disappear into some consortium research facility." The dragon's eyes opened again, and this time they stayed open. It was definitely looking at Marcus, and there was something in its gaze that suggested urgency. "I think it's trying to wake up," Marcus said. The pod's control interface had become more responsive to his touch over the past few hours. Symbols that had been dim were now glowing softly, and he could feel a subtle warmth whenever he placed his palm against specific patterns. It was as if the pod was recognizing him as its proper operator. Elena moved closer to the transparent section. "Its breathing is different. Faster." She was right. The slow, steady rhythm of deep stasis was giving way to something more like normal sleep. And as they watched, the dragon's wings began to shift slightly, as if it was beginning to stir. "The stasis is breaking down," Marcus realized. "It's going to wake up whether we want it to or not." The decision was made for them. The pod's humming changed pitch again, and more sections of the metal became transparent. They could see the dragon's full form now, graceful and powerful even in its confined space. It was larger than Marcus had initially thought, probably weighing as much as a full-grown human, but there was nothing threatening about its appearance. If anything, it looked almost fragile after what must have been centuries or millennia in stasis. The dragon's eyes opened fully, and it looked directly at Marcus. Then impossibly it spoke, not in words, but directly into his mind. The voice was warm, musical, and unmistakably female. "Finally, I was beginning to wonder if any of you had survived." Marcus stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a rack of tools. Elena grabbed his arm to steady him, her eyes wide with shock. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" The dragon was watching him with what might have been amusement. "She cannot hear me yet. The connection requires time to establish, and she lacks the proper genetic markers." "Genetic markers for what?" Marcus asked aloud. "For the bond that was forged between your species and mine long ago. You are a descendant of the Chosen, though the bloodline has been much diluted by time." Elena was looking back and forth between Marcus and the dragon. "You're talking to it." "She's talking to me," Marcus corrected. "Telepathically." The dragon's mental voice carried a note of gentle correction. Not telepathy, exactly. We are quantum entangled, you and I. It is the same principle that powers this pod, extended to allow communication across the barriers between organic minds. What are the genetic markers?" Marcus asked. "What makes humans special?" The dragon shifted within the pod, her wings spreading slightly before folding again. Your species was selected from modification long ago, though the changes were subtle. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved adaptability, and, most importantly, the ability to form quantum bonds with compatible entities. Modified by whom? By my people, working with yours. It was humanity's idea, actually. Your ancestors were already preparing for the day when they would need to take their place among the stars. Marcus felt his worldview shifting yet again. "How long ago are we talking about?" "Roughly 12,000 of your years. Your species was emerging from its last ice age, beginning to develop agriculture and permanent settlements. But you already understood that you were not alone in the universe. Asterisk Elena had been listening to Marcus's half of the conversation with growing confusion and concern. Marcus, what is it saying? Before he could respond, the pod's interface began cycling through new patterns. The dragon's eyes suddenly widened with what looked like alarm. We must leave this place immediately. They have found us. Asterisk, who has found us? The same ones who destroyed the Draconian ship. The same ones who have been hunting my kind across the galaxy for millennia. Asterisk, the workshop's proximity alarms began chiming softly. Something was approaching the station, something large enough to trigger the automated security systems. Marcus moved to his sensor console, pulling up the external scanner feeds. What he saw made his blood run cold. A ship was approaching Kepler Station, but it wasn't like anything in the consortium's registry. The vessel was huge, easily the size of a Draconian cruiser, but its design was completely alien. Instead of the elegant curves or biomechanical flowing forms favored by most galactic civilizations, this ship was all angles and harsh edges. It looked like it had been designed for one purpose: warfare. What is that? Elena asked, looking over his shoulder at the display. The dragon's mental voice was tight with fear and urgency. Asterisk harvesters. They seek to acquire and study all forms of quantum-bonded life in the galaxy. My people have been fighting them for eons. Asterisk, what do they want? To understand the quantum bonding process so they can replicate it artificially. They have already exterminated dozens of species in their experiments. Asterisk Marcus felt a chill run through him. Are they here for you? They're here for both of us. The bond between us makes us incredibly valuable to their research. Asterisk on the sensor display, smaller ships were detaching from the main vessel. Boarding craft, moving with the precise coordination of a military operation. Kepler Station's communications systems crackled to life as the station's administrators tried to establish contact with the newcomers. The response was immediate and terrifying. Energy beams lanced out from the smaller ships, precisely targeting the station's communication arrays and defense systems. Within seconds, Kepler Station was deaf, blind, and helpless. "They are coming," Asterisk the dragon said urgently. "We must release me from this pod." "How?" Instead of answering directly, the dragon guided him through a complex series of touch commands on the pod's interface. Each symbol he pressed caused another section of the metal to become transparent, until the entire structure was essentially a glass cage. Now place both hands on the final sequence. But be warned, once you do this, there's no going back. The quantum bond between us will be permanent. Asterisk Marcus hesitated. Everything about his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. But, looking at the scanner display, watching as boarding craft moved closer to the station, he realized he didn't really have a choice. He placed his hands on the indicated symbols. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Energy flowed through the pod systems, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his consciousness. It was as if a new sense had suddenly awakened, one that allowed him to perceive things that had been invisible before. The dragon's presence in his mind became stronger, clearer, no longer a voice, but a full awareness that existed alongside his own thoughts. He could feel her emotions, her memories stretching back across centuries, her deep and abiding love for the species that had chosen to join with hers in ancient times. The pod's metal shell began to dissolve, not breaking apart, but simply fading away like smoke. The dragon emerged gracefully, stretching wings that caught and refracted the workshop's lighting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. She was beautiful in a way that transcended anything Marcus had ever experienced. Her scales shifted through the entire visible spectrum as she moved, and there was an intelligence in her eyes that spoke of wisdom accumulated across lifetimes. "My name is Ethel," Asterisk, she said, her mental voice now perfectly clear. "And you are my bonded partner." Elena had been backing away from the dissolving pod, her face pale with shock. "Marcus, what have you done?" Before he could answer, the workshop's security systems activated. Someone was cutting through the outer door. Ethel's head turned toward the entrance, her posture shifting into something more aggressive. "They are here." "How do we get out?" Marcus asked. "We fly." Asterisk, the station is in vacuum. "Even if you could carry me, I don't have a suit." Ethel's mental voice carried a note of gentle amusement. Asterisk, the quantum bond provides many advantages. Trust me. Asterisk, the workshop door exploded inward, revealing 3 figures in advanced combat armor. They moved with inhuman precision, raising weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Ethel moved faster than Marcus's eyes could follow. One moment she was beside him, the next she was among the attackers. Her claws, apparently as hard as diamond, sliced through their armor like tissue paper. Energy blasts that should have incinerated her seemed to bend around her form, deflected by some kind of personal shielding system. The combat lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, 3 alien corpses lay scattered around the workshop entrance. "We must leave immediately," Asterisk Ethel said urgently. "More will come." "Elena," Marcus called. "Come with us." His friend and colleague was pressed against the far wall of the workshop, staring at the dragon with a mixture of terror and awe. "Go where? How?" "She cannot come," Asterisk Ethel said sadly. "The quantum bond is necessary for survival outside the station, and she lacks the proper genetic markers." Marcus felt torn between loyalty to his friend and the growing certainty that staying would mean death for all of them. The scanner displays showed more boarding craft approaching their section of the station. "Find somewhere safe," he told Elena. "Hide until this is over." "What about you?" Marcus looked at Ethel, feeling the strange new connection between them growing stronger. "I don't think my old life exists anymore." Ethel moved to the workshop's emergency airlock, her claws working at the manual controls. "Take my hand," she said. "The bond will protect you." Marcus reached out and grasped one of her clawed appendages. Immediately, he felt a tingling sensation spread through his body, as if every cell was being reinforced at the molecular level. The airlock opened, and they stepped out into space. Marcus should have died instantly. The vacuum of space, the killing cold, the radiation from nearby stars, all of it should have torn him apart in seconds. Instead, he felt perfectly comfortable, as if he was walking through a park on Earth. Ethel's wings spread wide, catching stellar winds that carried them away from Kepler Station. Looking back, Marcus could see the harvester ship looming over the station like a predatory insect. Smaller craft swarmed around the docking bays, and he could see energy weapons firing deep within the station structure. "We cannot help them," Asterisk Ethel said, sensing his distress. "But we can ensure their sacrifice was not meaningless." "How?" "By completing the mission that brought me to this sector of the galaxy. There are others of your kind who carry the bloodline, others who can be awakened to their true potential." Asterisk Marcus felt a strange mixture of grief and anticipation as Kepler Station fell away behind him. His old life was gone, probably forever. Sarah was dead, his workshop was destroyed, and he was now bonded to a creature from humanity's mythical past. But for the first time since his wife's death, he felt truly alive. "Where are we going?" Asterisk asked. Ethel's mental voice carried warmth and purpose. Asterisk home, to Earth. It is time for humanity to remember what if flying through space on the back of a dragon was nothing like Marcus had imagined it would be. There was no rush of wind, no sense of speed or movement. Instead, it felt like floating in a warm, protective bubble while the stars slowly shifted around them. Ethel's wings didn't actually propel them through space in any conventional sense. The quantum bond that connected them had created a localized field that interacted with the fundamental forces of the universe in ways that made traditional physics irrelevant. They moved at speeds that should have been impossible for organic beings, crossing light years in hours rather than decades. "Your species thinks of space as empty," Asterisk Ethel explained as they traveled. "But it is actually full of energy patterns and quantum fields that can be manipulated by those who understand them." Marcus found himself experiencing space in ways human science had never imagined. He could sense the gravitational currents that flowed between star systems, feel the subtle variations in the cosmic background radiation that marked the presence of inhabited worlds. Most remarkably, he could perceive the network of quantum entanglements that connected all living things across the galaxy. "This is how my people navigate," Asterisk Ethel said. "We follow the threads of life from world to world." "How many worlds are there with life like this?" Marcus asked through their mental link. "Fewer than there once were." The harvesters have been methodical in their destruction. Asterisk, as they traveled deeper into space, Ethel shared her memories of the galaxy as it had been millennia ago. Dozens of species had possessed the ability to form quantum bonds with compatible entities. Great civilizations had flourished, connected not by ships and communication networks, but by living links that transcended the barriers of space and time. The dragons were guardians, asterisk, she explained. Each of us bonded with representatives of promising species, helping guide their development and protecting them from threats. What happened? The harvesters. They appeared from beyond the galactic rim roughly 5,000 years ago. At first, we thought they were simply another spacefaring species seeking trade or territory. But their true purpose became clear when entire worlds began to go silent. Asterisk Marcus felt her grief and rage as she relived those memories. World after world falling to creatures that sought not conquest, but understanding. The harvesters wanted to learn how quantum bonding worked, so they could artificially replicate it for their own purposes. They succeeded, eventually, but the artificial bonds they created were abominations, links forged through torture and experimentation rather than mutual choice and compatibility. Asterisk, the dragon's mental voice grew darker as she continued. Asterisk, with each species they destroyed, they grew stronger. The artificial bonds allowed them to harvest not just knowledge, but the actual life force of their victims. Asterisk, how did you escape? We didn't, not really. My people made a desperate choice. We placed ourselves and our bonded partners into stasis hidden across the galaxy, waiting for the day when the threat had passed or when we could find a way to fight back. Asterisk, Marcus understood now why the pod had been hidden on a Draconian ship. The Draconians themselves were descendants of one of the bonded species, their civilization built around the knowledge and wisdom they had gained from their dragon partners. They had become the guardians of the sleeping dragons, protecting them even as the harvesters continued their relentless expansion. But something has changed, asterisk, Ethel said. Asterisk, the quantum threads that connect life across the galaxy have been singing a new song. A song of hope. Asterisk, what kind of hope? Humanity. Your species has been spreading across the galaxy faster than any before you. And, unlike the others, you have not forgotten the old ways entirely. Asterisk, as if to illustrate her point, Ethel directed his attention to a cluster of stars ahead of them. Even with his enhanced senses, Marcus had to concentrate to make out what she wanted him to see. But gradually he began to perceive something remarkable. There were humans on dozens of worlds in this region. Not just the official colonies that the consortium knew about, but secret settlements, hidden outposts, and underground communities that had somehow escaped galactic notice. They were connected by quantum threads, so faint they were almost invisible, but they were definitely there. Your species has been preparing, even without conscious knowledge of what was coming. Asterisk, they passed through several star systems over the next few hours, and Marcus began to understand the scope of what humanity had been doing. While the consortium believed they had humanity safely contained within a few dozen authorized settlements, the truth was far more complex. Humans have been spreading throughout the galaxy like seeds on the wind, establishing footholds wherever they could find hospitable conditions. More importantly, they had been maintaining connections with each other through means the aliens couldn't detect or understand. Quantum entanglement occurred naturally in humans who shared common ancestry or strong emotional bonds. The connections were weak compared to the artificial links used by galactic civilizations, but they were also completely undetectable to conventional scanning methods. The harvesters have been hunting the bonded species for millennia, asterisk, Ethel explained. But they never realized that humanity was already naturally developing the abilities they sought to steal. Why haven't they targeted us specifically? Because until now, the connections have been too weak to detect. And because humanity has disguised its true nature so well that even the consortium doesn't realize what you represent. Asterisk, Marcus thought about the thousands of humans scattered across consortium space, working as mechanics, miners, traders, and servants. All of them quietly connected to each other through bonds that no alien technology could perceive or interrupt. It was a network that spanned the galaxy, hidden in plain sight. They were approaching the solar system now, and Marcus felt his excitement growing. He hadn't seen Earth in over 20 years, not since he'd left to find work in the outer colonies. The blue-green world hanging in space ahead of them looked exactly as he remembered, beautiful and fragile and utterly unique. "It is more than beautiful," Ethel said, sensing his emotions. "It is the center of everything." As they drew closer to Earth, Marcus began to understand what she meant. The quantum threads that connected humanity across the galaxy all led back here, to the world where the species had originated. But there was something else, something that made his enhanced senses tingle with recognition. There were dragons here, not sleeping in stasis pods like Ethel had been, but awake and active. He could sense them moving through the upper atmosphere, their presence masked from human detection by the same quantum field effects that had protected him and Ethel during their journey. "My people never left entirely," Ethel explained. "A few remained awake to watch over humanity's development, to ensure that the potential we had seen in your ancestors was properly nurtured. They descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Marcus marveled at how different the world looked from his enhanced perspective. He could see the flow of energy through the planet's magnetic field, the way life itself created patterns and currents that influenced weather and geological activity. Earth wasn't just a planet with life on it. It was a living entity in its own right. Ethel guided them toward a mountainous region that Marcus eventually recognized as somewhere in the Himalayas. But as they drew closer, he realized that what he was seeing wasn't entirely natural. Hidden among the peaks and valleys was a complex that had clearly been built, though its architecture was unlike anything in human civilization. "The sanctuary," Ethel explained. "It has been here for 12,000 years, waiting." They landed on a platform that seemed to be carved from living rock, its surface warm despite the mountain's altitude. Other dragons were already there, along with humans Marcus didn't recognize. But as he looked at them more closely, he realized that wasn't entirely true. The humans all shared certain features that he had seen before, in old photographs and mirrors. They were descendants of the original bloodlines, the families that had been chosen for modification so long ago. And they were clearly expecting him. An elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes bright with intelligence and something that might have been relief. "Marcus Chun," she said, "we've been waiting for you. How did you know I was coming?" "Because your awakening sent ripples through the quantum field that every bonded human on Earth could feel." She smiled. "My name is Dr. Sarah Liu, and I represent the Council of Guardians." Marcus felt a shock of recognition at the name. "Sarah? Not your Sarah, I'm afraid. But yes, she was one of us. Her death was not an accident. Marcus, she died trying to protect information that could have exposed our existence." The grief and anger that Marcus had been carrying since his wife's death suddenly crystallized into something far more powerful. Who killed her? Consortium agents working for the Harvesters. They've been systematically hunting down anyone who showed signs of quantum bonding potential. Dr. Liu's expression hardened. "Your wife discovered evidence that humans were being targeted for genetic testing. She was trying to warn the hidden communities when they caught her." Ethel's mental voice was warm with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier, but you needed time to adjust to the bond before learning such painful truths." Marcus felt his world shifting once again. Everything he thought he knew about Sarah's death, about humanity's place in the galaxy, about his own life, had been built on lies and carefully constructed deceptions. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "The systematic targeting began about 5 years ago," Dr. Liu replied. "But the preparation for this moment has been ongoing for millennia. Your species has been guided and protected, prepared for the day when you would need to take your true place in the galactic community." She gestured toward the complex around them. "This facility contains the accumulated knowledge of dozens of civilizations, preserved by the dragons and their human partners. Technology, science, art, philosophy, everything that was lost when the Harvesters destroyed the bonded species." Marcus looked around at the buildings and structures carved into the mountain. "You're saying humanity has been secretly maintaining a galactic civilization's worth of knowledge?" "More than that. We've been improving it, adapting it, preparing for the day when we would need to use it to defend not just ourselves, but everyone the Harvesters have threatened." Ethel spread her wings, the gesture somehow conveying both pride and urgency. Asterisk, the time for hiding is over. The harvesters have finally realized what humanity represents, and they are mobilizing their entire fleet to destroy Earth before your species can reach its full potential. Asterisk, Dr. Liu nodded grimly. We estimate we have perhaps 6 months before they arrive in force. 6 months to awaken every human with the proper bloodline and prepare for a war that will determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. How many humans have a bloodline? Marcus asked. Roughly 1 in every 1,000. That means approximately 8 million potential bonded partners currently alive. Dr. Liu's expression grew more hopeful. Each one capable of linking with a dragon partner and wielding the kind of power you experienced during your journey here. Marcus thought about the harvesters, about their massive ships and advanced technology, about the fact that they had been systematically destroying civilizations for millennia. 8 million sounds like a lot, but is it enough? Numbers are not what will decide this conflict. Asterisk, Ethel said. Asterisk, it will be decided by understanding. The harvesters seek to steal what we freely give. They create artificial bonds through force and violence, while we form true partnerships based on choice and mutual respect. Asterisk, Dr. Liu led them deeper into the complex, through chambers filled with technology that made the most advanced consortium equipment look primitive by comparison. The dragons have been preparing for this day for a very long time. They've learned everything there is to know about harvester technology and tactics. And what do they learn? That the artificial bonds the harvesters create have a fatal weakness. They require constant maintenance and reinforcement to remain stable. But more importantly, they can be disrupted by exposure to true quantum bonding. Marcus felt Ethel's anticipation growing stronger. Asterisk, a single bonded pair can sever dozens of artificial links simply by being in proximity to them. The harvester's greatest strength can be turned into their greatest weakness. Asterisk, they emerged onto a vast observation platform that overlooked a hidden valley. What Marcus saw there took his breath away. Hundreds of dragons filled the sky, their scales catching and refracting sunlight in ways that created patterns of impossible beauty. And on the ground below, humans moved with the fluid grace of those who had already formed quantum bonds. We've been awakening bloodline carriers for the past month, Dr. Liu explained. Every day, more arrive as the quantum field calls to them. Marcus watched as new bonded pairs took their first flights together, humans and dragons learning to move as one entity across impossible distances. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. But underlying the beauty was purpose, and underlying the purpose was the knowledge that everything, humanity's future, the fate of the galaxy's remaining civilizations, the very concept of free will itself, would soon depend on their success. Are you ready? Asterisk, Ethel asked. Marcus thought about his wife, about Elena, and the other humans still scattered across consortium space, about all the species that had already fallen to the harvester's relentless expansion. What do we do first? Dr. Liu smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, Marcus saw hope in her expression. We teach you to fight, and then we take the war to them. Training to become a galactic warrior while riding a dragon turned out to be nothing like the fantasies Marcus had entertained as a child. It was brutal, exhausting, and required him to completely reconstruct his understanding of physics, combat, and the nature of consciousness itself. The first lesson took place in a chamber deep within a mountain complex, where the walls were lined with a crystal matrix that could simulate any environment in the galaxy. Dr. Liu and the other council members had designed a curriculum that compressed thousands of years of accumulated knowledge into intensive sessions that pushed the human mind to its absolute limits. Quantum bonding isn't just about sharing consciousness, explained Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the council's expert on dragon physiology. It's about becoming a single entity with capabilities that neither partner could achieve alone. Marcus found himself paired with other newly bonded humans, learning to coordinate movements and tactics that seemed impossible until they suddenly became natural. With Ethel's guidance, he discovered that the quantum field allowed for forms of teamwork that went far beyond anything possible in conventional warfare. Feel the connections between all bonded pairs. Asterisk, Ethel instructed as Marcus practiced formation, flying with a dozen other dragon human teams. Asterisk, we're not separate entities fighting together. We are facets of a single consciousness expressing itself across multiple forms. Asterisk, the sensation was overwhelming at first. Marcus could feel the thoughts and emotions of every other human in the formation, could sense their dragon's awareness of air currents and energy fields that his own perceptions couldn't detect. But gradually, he learned to integrate the information flow without losing his individual identity. The harvesters can't do this, Dr. Liu explained during a tactical briefing. Their artificial bonds create master-slave relationships, not partnerships. They can coordinate their forces, but they can't truly integrate consciousness the way we can. The strategic implications were staggering. A formation of bonded pairs could function as a single mind distributed across multiple bodies, capable of making split-second decisions and adaptations that would take conventional forces minutes or hours to coordinate. But the real revelations came when they began learning about the weapons and defenses available to bonded pairs. The dragons carry no external weapons, Dr. Chunwei explained. Marcus had initially been surprised to encounter someone who shared his surname, until he learned that the Chun bloodline was one of the oldest and most widespread among the chosen families. They don't need them. The demonstration took place in a specially shielded chamber where Marcus and Ethel were asked to attack a series of targets using only their natural abilities. The first target was a block of the same exotic metal used in harvester ship hulls, supposedly impervious to most known weapons. Focus on the quantum structure of the metal. Asterisk, Ethel instructed. Feel how the atoms are held together by electromagnetic forces. Marcus reached out with senses he was still learning to use, perceiving the target at a level far below what conventional instruments could detect. He could see the patterns of energy that gave the metal its strength, the way electrons orbited atomic nuclei in perfectly organized formations. Now, disrupt the pattern. Asterisk, working together, Marcus and Ethel extended their quantum field toward the target. Instead of applying external force, they simply convinced the metal's atoms to change their behavior. The electromagnetic bonds that held the structure together suddenly weakened, and the supposedly indestructible block crumbled into dust. Matter manipulation, Dr. Chunwei said with satisfaction. The harvester's greatest advantage has always been their superior technology. But technology is just organized matter and energy. Bonded pairs can reorganize it at will. Over the following weeks, Marcus learned to disrupt electronics, neutralize energy weapons, and even manipulate gravitational fields within a limited range. More importantly, he learned to work with other bonded pairs to scale these abilities up dramatically. A single pair can disable a small ship, Dr. Tanaka explained. 100 pairs working together can tear apart a battle cruiser simply by convincing its hull that it no longer wants to maintain structural integrity. But the training wasn't just about learning to fight. The Council had been gathering intelligence on harvester operations across the galaxy, and what they had discovered was worse than anyone had initially realized. They're not just hunting bonded species anymore, Dr. Liu reported during a strategic briefing. They've begun systematic extermination of any species that shows potential for developing quantum bonding naturally. The holographic display showed a map of the galaxy with red markers indicating worlds that had gone silent over the past decade. There were hundreds of them, representing billions of lives that had been snuffed out simply because they might have eventually threatened harvester supremacy. The human colonies? Marcus asked. 40% have been attacked in the past year. The consortium leadership believes they're dealing with a new form of piracy, but we know better. Dr. Liu's expression was grim. The harvesters are preparing for total galactic sterilization. They've determined that the only way to maintain their dominance is to eliminate any species capable of true quantum bonding. Marcus felt Ethel's rage through their bond, a fury that stretched back across millennia of watching civilizations fall to these monsters. But alongside the anger was something else. Anticipation. They have made a mistake, asterisk, she said. For the first time in their existence, they have revealed themselves before completing their work. What do you mean? Previous campaigns were conducted in secret, with individual worlds falling one by one, while their neighbors remained unaware of the threat. But by targeting humanity so openly, they have exposed their true nature to every major power in the galaxy. Asterisk, Dr. Liu nodded. The consortium is finally beginning to understand that they're not dealing with random attacks. Some of the member species are starting to suspect the truth about the Harvester's nature. Will they help us? Some might, but we can't count on it. Dr. Liu activated a new display showing Harvester fleet movements. Our intelligence suggests they're massing for a final assault on Earth. They know that if humanity reaches its full potential, their entire campaign of extermination will fail. The scale of the approaching fleet was terrifying. Thousands of ships, each one the size of a small city, converging on the solar system from multiple directions. Even with all the bonded pairs they could awaken, humanity would be outnumbered by a factor of hundreds to one. But Marcus was learning that numbers weren't everything in this kind of warfare. Show him the deep simulation, Dr. Liu said. Dr. Chun Wei activated a new program. And suddenly, Marcus found himself experiencing a full-scale battle between Harvester forces and bonded defenders. The simulation was based on actual historical conflicts, reconstructed from dragon memories, and intelligence gathered over millennia of hidden observation. What Marcus saw changed everything he thought he knew about the coming war. They used the quantum field to appear and disappear at will, to coordinate attacks across vast distances, and to adapt their tactics faster than any conventional force could respond. Most importantly, they could turn the Harvester's own weapons against them. Every artificial bond is a weakness we can exploit, Dr. Tanaka explained as the simulation showed bonded pairs severing the connections between Harvester commanders and their ships. When those bonds break, their entire command structure collapses. But can we get close enough to make it work? Marcus asked. Their ships have defenses we can barely imagine. Physical defenses, Ethel corrected. But quantum fields can penetrate any material barrier. The simulation shifted to show the true scope of what bonded pairs could accomplish. Working together, they could project their consciousness across interplanetary distances, appearing anywhere in a star system without warning. They could phase through solid matter by temporarily shifting their quantum signature. They could even manipulate time itself on a local scale, slowing down enemy reactions while accelerating their own movements. This is what the Harvesters fear, Dr. Liu said. Not our technology or our numbers, but our potential. They've spent millennia perfecting artificial quantum bonding, but they can never achieve what comes naturally to truly compatible partners. Marcus watched the simulation play out, seeing how a small force of bonded defenders could systematically dismantle a Harvester fleet many times their size. But he also saw the cost. The kind of power being demonstrated required perfect coordination and absolute trust between partners. One mistake, one moment of doubt or fear, and the quantum bond would collapse, leaving both partners vulnerable. How many pairs do we have now, he asked. 3,000 fully bonded, with more awakening every day. We estimate we'll have close to 5,000 by the time the Harvester fleet arrives. It still seemed impossibly small compared to what they would be facing. But Marcus was beginning to understand that this wouldn't be a conventional war. It would be a battle between two completely different philosophies of existence. The Harvesters represented forced evolution, artificial enhancement, the idea that consciousness could be improved through technology and control. They had built a civilization based on the premise that power came from dominating and reshaping the natural order. Humanity and the dragons represented something else entirely. They had chosen partnership over domination, cooperation over control. Their power came not from forcing change, but from accepting it, not from fighting the quantum field, but from learning to dance with it. There is something else you must understand, Ethel said as the training session ended. This war will not be won through violence alone. What do you mean? The Harvester's artificial bonds are maintained through fear, hatred, and the desire for dominance. But those emotions are incompatible with true quantum bonding. If we can demonstrate a better way, if we can show the enslaved species that freedom is possible, their entire empire will collapse from within. Marcus thought about Elena and the millions of other humans still scattered across consortium space, unaware of their true heritage or the war that was coming. He thought about all the species that the Harvesters had conquered and enslaved over the millennia, held in artificial bonds that turned them into tools rather than partners. We're not just fighting to save humanity, he realized. We're fighting to free everyone. Dr. Liu smiled, and Marcus saw in her expression the same hope he had glimpsed when he first arrived at the sanctuary. Now you understand why this moment is so important. For the first time in galactic history, the enslaved have a chance to break free. But only if we can show them that freedom is possible. The training intensified over the following days as more bonded pairs arrived at the sanctuary. Marcus found himself working with teams from every continent, humans whose bloodlines traced back to ancient cultures from across Earth. Each brought different perspectives and capabilities, creating a diversity of approaches that made the overall force far more adaptable than any conventional military unit. But the most remarkable development was the arrival of refugees from other worlds. They've been coming for weeks, Dr. Liu explained as she introduced Marcus to a group of beings he didn't immediately recognize. Survivors from species the Harvesters thought they had completely destroyed. The refugees were the descendants of quantum-bonded species who had somehow escaped the Harvesters' genocide. Some had been hiding in remote star systems for generations. Others had been rescued by dragons who had remained awake specifically to preserve remnants of the destroyed civilizations. Most remarkable of all, many of them still carry the genetic potential for quantum bonding. The Harvesters never completely succeeded in destroying the bloodlines, explained Zura, a descendant of the Christek, whose people have been among the first to fall to Harvester expansion. We've been waiting for someone to show us how to fight back. Marcus found himself working alongside beings whose species existed only in ancient records, learning techniques that combined human innovation with knowledge preserved from dozens of extinct civilizations. Together, they represented the last hope not just for their own species, but for the very concept of free will in the galaxy. As the Harvester fleet drew closer to Earth, Marcus finally understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just a war for survival. It was a battle for the right to exist as free, conscious beings rather than tools in someone else's grand design. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt ready for whatever was coming. The Harvester fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. Marcus first became aware of their presence, not through any conventional sensor system, but through the quantum field itself. He was practicing advanced formation maneuvers with his training group when every bonded pair in the sky suddenly stopped moving, their attention drawn to something that made the very fabric of space-time shiver with wrongness. "They are here," Ethel said, her mental voice carrying a mixture of anticipation and ancient grief. "And they have brought everything." From his position high above the sanctuary, Marcus could see the entire assembled defense force spread across the valley below. 5,000 bonded pairs, humans and dragons working in perfect harmony, represented the largest gathering of free quantum-bonded entities in galactic history. They looked magnificent and utterly inadequate at the same time. The Harvester fleet was emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their massive ships casting shadows that could be seen even at interplanetary distances. Early reports from the concealed monitoring stations suggested a force of over 3,000 vessels, ranging from city-sized dreadnoughts to smaller craft that were still larger than anything in the human navy. "They're not taking any chances," Dr. Liu observed from the command center. "This is the entire Harvester war machine." Marcus descended to join the strategic briefing, where holographic displays showed the enemy fleet's disposition. The Harvesters were moving with characteristic precision, their ships arranging themselves in formations that would allow them to systematically sterilize every planet in the solar system. "Estimated time to engagement?" asked Commander Sarah Kim, one of the few military officers who had been read into the Dragon program before the current crisis. 6 hours until they reach Earth orbital space," Dr. Chun Wei replied. "But they're already jamming all conventional communications and beginning preliminary bombardment of outer system installations." Marcus felt a chill as he watched the tactical display update. The Harvesters weren't just coming to conquer Earth. They were preparing to erase every trace of human civilization from the galaxy. "This is how they have always fought," Ethel explained. "Complete extermination, leaving no possibility of resistance or recovery." "What about the consortium fleet?" Commander Kim asked. Dr. Liu's expression was grim. 3 battle groups tried to intercept the Harvesters near Jupiter. They lasted approximately 14 minutes. The holographic display showed the wreckage of ships that had represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology. Consortium vessels that should have been able to challenge anything in the galaxy had been torn apart like toys, their crews never understanding what they were really fighting. But Marcus noticed something else in the tactical data. The Harvester ships are all maintaining specific formations. Look at the spacing between their vessels. Dr. Tanaka studied the pattern. You're right. They're positioning themselves to maintain optimal artificial bonding networks across their entire fleet, which means they're also vulnerable in ways they do not realize. Ethel added. The Council had spent months developing strategies that would exploit the fundamental weaknesses of artificial quantum bonding. Unlike the natural partnerships between humans and dragons, harvester bonds required constant maintenance and reinforcement. More importantly, they could be disrupted by exposure to the quantum field fluctuations created by true bonding. Initiate Phase 1, Dr. Liu ordered. Across the sanctuary, bonded pairs began to lift off in coordinated groups. Marcus found himself assigned to Strike Group 7, a mixed unit of veteran and newly awakened pairs tasked with targeting the Harvester fleet's communication networks. The journey from Earth to the edge of the solar system took less than an hour, though they traveled through quantum space rather than conventional interplanetary routes. Marcus had learned to navigate the quantum field during his training, but doing so while approaching the largest concentration of hostile forces in galactic history was an entirely different experience. Feel how the artificial bonds distort the quantum field. Ethel instructed as they approached the Harvester perimeter. It is like a disease, creating patterns that fight against the natural flow of consciousness. Marcus could sense it now, a wrongness that made his enhanced awareness recoil. The Harvester fleet existed as a single massive artificial entity, thousands of individual ships, and millions of crew members all bound together through forced quantum links that turned them into components of a vast machine rather than thinking beings. Strike Group 7's first target was a communication relay ship, a vessel the size of a small moon that coordinated information flow between different sections of the Harvester fleet. According to intelligence gathered over centuries of observation, destroying these relay ships would force the Harvesters to fall back on slower, more vulnerable communication methods. The attack began before Marcus even realized they were in combat. Working together, the 12 bonded pairs in a strike group phased through the Harvester ship's hull as if it were made of air rather than exotic matter. They materialized inside the vessel's central command center, where dozens of enslaved beings worked at control stations under the oversight of Harvester controllers. What Marcus saw there made him understand the true horror of what they were fighting. The crew members weren't wearing restraints or operating under obvious coercion. Instead, they worked with the mechanical precision of beings whose consciousness had been completely subsumed into the artificial bonding network. Their eyes were vacant, their movements coordinated with inhuman efficiency. They had been turned into biological components of the ship's computer systems. Do not hesitate, Ethel warned. They're already lost. But we can prevent others from sharing their fate. The strike group moved through the ship like ghosts, their quantum fields disrupting every artificial bond they encountered. The effect was immediate and devastating. Crew members suddenly stopped working as the force connections that controlled their minds were severed. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by the return of individual consciousness after years or decades of slavery. Others began to scream as they realized what had been done to them. But the Harvester controllers proved more resilient. These beings had willingly joined the artificial bonding network, trading their individual consciousness for power and a form of immortality. When their connections to the enslaved crew were severed, they simply activated backup systems and began trying to re-establish control. The battle that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced during training. The controllers fought using weapons that existed more in the quantum field than in physical space, attacking the bonds between humans and dragons rather than their bodies. It was like fighting with thoughts and emotions rather than claws and energy beams. Stay connected to me, Ethel urged as one of the controllers focused its attack on their partnership. Remember why you chose this bond. Marcus felt the artificial influence trying to worm its way into his consciousness, offering power and certainty in exchange for surrendering his individual will. For a moment, he could see the appeal. The artificial bonding network promised an end to doubt, fear, and the pain of loss. He would never have to grieve for Sarah again if he simply let go of his human attachments and became part of something larger and more powerful. But the promise was a lie, and Marcus could see that now. The artificial bonds didn't eliminate pain and loss. They simply transferred ownership of those emotions to the Harvester Collective. Individual suffering became a resource to be harvested and distributed according to the needs of the network. Working together, Strike Group 7 systematically dismantled the communication relay ship's artificial bonding infrastructure. They didn't destroy the vessel itself. Instead, they freed its crew and turned the ship into a beacon that would broadcast the quantum signature of true bonding across the Harvester fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Other Harvester vessels began to experience cascade failures as their artificial bonding networks were contaminated by exposure to freely given partnerships. Ships that had operated with perfect coordination for millennia suddenly found themselves dealing with crew members who were beginning to remember what individual consciousness felt like. Phase 2. Asterisk came the mental communication from Strike Group Command. All across the solar system, bonded pairs began implementing the Council's master strategy. Rather than trying to destroy the Harvester fleet through conventional warfare, they were systematically liberating the enslaved beings who made up the majority of Harvester forces. The psychological impact was devastating to Harvester morale. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, they were facing an enemy that could undo their greatest advantage. The artificial bonds that had given them power over countless species were being revealed as the weakness they had always been. But the Harvesters weren't defenseless. As more of their ships were infiltrated and their crews liberated, they began to adapt their tactics. Instead of relying on coordinated fleet actions, they started deploying autonomous weapons systems that couldn't be affected by quantum field manipulation. Marcus found himself reassigned to Strike Group 1, the unit tasked with engaging the Harvester command ship directly. The vessel was a monster, large enough to house entire cities within its hull. According to intelligence reports, it contained the core artificial intelligence that coordinated the entire Harvester civilization. This will be the most dangerous part, Asterisk Ethel warned as they approached the command ship. Asterisk, the AI that controls their empire, has been refining artificial quantum bonding for thousands of years. It knows ways to defend against our abilities that we have never encountered. Asterisk, the attack on the command ship required every bonded pair in the Liberation Force. Working together, they created a quantum field distortion large enough to phase an entire strike force through the vessel's defenses. What they found inside was both more and less than what Marcus had expected. The Harvester Command AI wasn't a traditional computer system. Instead, it was a vast organic brain composed of neural tissue harvested from thousands of different species. Each component had once been a sentient being, but they had been surgically altered and forcibly linked together to create a single, overwhelming intelligence. It was the ultimate expression of artificial quantum bonding, a consciousness created by destroying countless others and reassembling their pieces into a new form. We cannot free them, Asterisk Ethel said sadly as they moved through the chamber that housed the composite brain. They had been too damaged, their individual identities too thoroughly erased. Then, what do? We show them what they could have been. Asterisk, the final battle wasn't fought with weapons or quantum manipulation. Instead, it was a contest of philosophies made manifest in the structure of reality itself. Working together, every bonded pair in the Liberation Force opened their partnerships to the Harvester Command AI. They showed it what true quantum bonding looked like. The joy of choosing to link with another consciousness while remaining fundamentally individual. The strength that came from cooperation rather than domination. The beauty of diversity, working together toward common goals. The AI had been programmed to understand only artificial bonds, relationships based on control and subjugation. Exposure to the quantum field signatures of freely chosen partnerships created cascading failures throughout its neural network. For the first time in its existence, it experienced something it couldn't categorize or control. The result was the complete collapse of the Harvester Empire. Across the galaxy, artificial bonding networks that had held entire civilizations in slavery for millennia suddenly failed. Billions of enslaved beings found themselves free for the first time in their lives, able to think and choose and feel without external control. Some of the liberated species immediately turned on their former masters. Others simply fled, seeking refuge in remote star systems where they could rebuild their shattered civilizations. But many chose a different path. They came to Earth. In the months following the liberation, representatives from dozens of species arrived in the solar system seeking to learn about quantum bonding partnerships. The sanctuary expanded rapidly, becoming a center for teaching the techniques that humanity and the dragons had preserved across the millennia. Marcus found himself serving as an instructor and ambassador, helping former slaves learn to form genuine bonds with willing partners. It was difficult work. Many of the refugees had been so damaged by artificial bonding that they couldn't initially trust any form of consciousness sharing. But gradually new partnerships began to form, not just between humans and dragons, but between members of different species who discovered compatibility across the barriers of biology and culture. The galaxy was rebuilding itself, but this time on principles of cooperation rather than domination. It's what we always hoped for, Dr. Liu told Marcus during one of their regular briefings. A truly free galactic civilization, based on voluntary association rather than conquest and control. Marcus nodded, though he remained aware of how fragile their victory really was. The Harvester Empire was gone, but the temptation to use artificial bonding for personal gain would always exist. Vigilance would be required to ensure that the mistakes of the past weren't repeated. There will be new challenges, Ethel agreed. But for the first time in millennia, we faced them together, looking out over the expanded sanctuary, where humans worked alongside beings from a dozen different species to build a better future. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, genuine hope for what was to come. The widowed mechanic who had bought a dragon at auction had become something he never could have imagined. But, more importantly, he had helped ensure that the galaxy's future would be decided by free choice rather than forced evolution. And that, Marcus thought as he prepared for another training session with newly arrived refugees, made everything they had endured worthwhile. The universe was vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered. And for the first time in galactic history, every sentient being would have the chance to explore those wonders as a free and equal partner in the great adventure of consciousness itself.